National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
Opus Dei, a well-known Catholic organization of lay people and clergy, is in mourning over the loss of 3 of its members who drowned on June 18th. This week on Register Radio, we're joined by Register staff writer Matt McDonald, who's reporting on the tragedy at a scenic vista in the Northern California wilderness called Rattlesnake Falls, tells the story of the 3 men who lost their lives and the extraordinary work of mercy that followed their deaths. And then we turn to a recent Supreme Court ruling that upheld a Texas law designed to restrict children's access to online pornography sites. Now that such laws have passed constitutional muster, the question is, can they be enforced? Register staff writer Jonah McKeown joins us to break down the technology that could turn the tide of the porn epidemic that's poisoning the minds and hearts of so many young people today. Hello, I'm Shannon Mullen, the editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register. And joining us today is Matt McDonald. Matt, how are you?
Hi, Shannon.
Matt, first I want to congratulate you. You're the recipient of a great honor from the Catholic Media Association. You recently won first place for feature writing for a wonderful story you wrote last year about being Catholic in Salem, Massachusetts at Halloween. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You've got another powerful piece in the latest issue of the Register and posted online at ncregister.com. It's titled Tragedy at Rattlesnake Falls. Opus Dei mourns the drowning of 3 of its members. Matt, let's begin with a brief explainer. What is Opus Dei?
Opus Dei is what's called a personal prelature in the Roman Catholic Church. That's a unique designation that makes it directly answerable to the Vatican. And it is consists largely of lay people, largely run by lay people. The head of it is a cleric, and there are priests throughout the organization. But the vast majority of members are lay people who try to live holiness through ordinary work. It was founded in 1928 by St. Jose Maria Escrivá, a Spanish priest, who had this idea that he considered to be a revelation from God to make this institution. And it has since spread to a number of countries throughout the world. There's about 94,000 members worldwide.
Okay. Next, what and where is Rattlesnake Falls, and what were these 3 men doing there?
Opus Dei has numeraries, is the term they use for the vast majority of lay celibate members who typically live in Opus Dei centers together in a kind of group home setting. And these numeraries, ordinarily they work a typical job. They might work for Opus Dei itself, but in their spare time, they spend a lot of time working with kids, working with college students and married people in charitable endeavors and in spiritual direction. Every year, every summer, numeraries, these lay celibate members, make a 3-week annual course where they study something, some field of study, but also during these 3 courses, there's time for recreation. So several of the people who are men, these are men who are at this particular event, several of the men were at a retreat center run by Opus Dei north of San Francisco. And they participated in a day-long excursion to Rattlesnake Falls, which is a waterfall not so far from Lake Tahoe, kind of hard to get to. So from their center, they made a 3-hour drive and then a 4-hour trek through a rough terrain to get to this waterfall.
Now, Matt, I know that a lot of the details we don't know the full story, but very briefly, what do we know that happened at these falls that caused these 3 men to drown?
The leader of the expedition, so we'll start off by saying there were 7 hikers initially. One had to go back soon because they got a call about a family matter. So 6 hikers proceeded along the 4-mile trail to Rattlesnake Falls. The leader, Matt McDonald, had been to these falls many times before, and he was tip-top shape. He was an athlete, age 50, but in excellent shape, physical condition. Had been to the falls many times before and had jumped off ledges near the falls into a natural pool below many times before. So this is something he felt very comfortable doing and leading this expedition. And he led them there, and they had lunch, and then 2 of them jumped off a ledge about 20 feet above the natural pool below. Those 2 were Matt McDonald and another hiker. And the 2 of them got out without incident, although they noticed that there was a very strong current. In fact, Matt McDonald was surprised by how strong the current was, because apparently it's not something he'd encountered before. They went around the bend from the natural pool onto a riverbank and got out of the water. Shortly after they jumped, another hiker jumped. His name was Val Crayus, and he was 59 years old. He was living in Los Angeles and was a partner in an accounting firm. He jumped off the ledge, and then when he went to the water, he started making cries of distress. Now, what happened to him is unclear. It's not clear why he was in distress. But Matt McDonald heard these cries. The men on the ledge and in the area could hear Val Crayus' voice, but they couldn't make out what he was saying. Matt McDonald went back to the ledge and pretty quickly jumped into the water again. And shortly after he did, another hiker named Matt Anthony, who was 44 years old and a member of Opus Dei leadership in New York City, also jumped off the ledge. From here, it gets murky exactly what happened. We know the end result. They all drowned. Exactly why and how, it's not clear, in part because it was very noisy there because of the waterfall, and the 3 men went out of sight at some point after they entered the water, to the point where the 3 remaining hikers were not sure whether they drifted downstream and had gotten out of the river somewhere else or resting on a rock, and they went downstream hoping they'd find them, and they didn't find them. That's when they thought, well, maybe they've drowned. At this point, the 3 are in a difficult situation because it had been a difficult trek to get to the waterfall, and they really weren't sure what to do. They were out of cell phone service range, but one of them realized that his cell phone had an SOS connectivity function, and he was able to get a message to the authorities, who sent a helicopter. The helicopter came several times with rescue workers at one point, and eventually evacuated all of them to safety.
Yeah, what happened to them is heartbreaking, and that's a lot of, you're recounting that in your piece. That's some very tough stuff. But there's a lot of life in your story too, which I think readers will appreciate. What can you tell us about these 3 men and why they were such inspirational characters?
Your friends described them as extraordinary individuals. So we'll start with the fact that they were accomplished in life, meaning in their work and their achievements. Matt Anthony, as I mentioned, was a member of senior leadership in Opus Dei. He had the number 2 position in charge of men's apostolic activities in the United States and Canada, and for a large organization, that's a big job. Matt McDonald was also involved in Opus Dei leadership. Before that, he led a center in Los Angeles, and during that time, he ran mentoring for young men and also a summer camp for boys. And before that, he had earned a doctorate in biomedical engineering and worked on improving cochlear implants for the hard of hearing. And Val Crayus was, as I mentioned, a partner in an accounting firm. None of these things, though, is what people remember them for. They remember their personalities, and they remember their faith, and they remember how they tried to serve God and serve others. All 3 seem to have spent large portions of their time helping other people, either by mentoring high school students or college students or married men in Opus Dei, giving spiritual direction, or just being available. One example is Val Crayus. Several people told me if you asked him to do something and it involved a long drive or a series of drives, he'd just do it immediately, even though he was a very busy man in his work life and in his volunteer life. He would make very long drives, one in Colorado, one in Southern California, but he seemed to do this very often, just to help out or to see people in need. And this is the kind of activity that their friends talked about with all three.
Yeah, there's another narrative within your piece about the man who recovered these three men's remains. We've only got a couple of minutes, but who is Juan Heredia, Matt, and how does he fit into your story?
Juan Heredia is 53 years old. He's originally from Argentina, came to the United States about 25 years ago, and he sells loan mortgages and is a general contractor for his regular work, but he's also a diver by avocation. And in March 2024, so we're talking a little bit over a year ago, he started as a volunteer looking for lost people who had drowned, the bodies of lost people who had drowned, just on his own. He was just offered to do it with no charge. And he did that in this case. He trekked on a twisted ankle to the 7-mile hike with two assistants. And then he did what essentially is a free dive down 47 feet into the natural pool with no oxygen tank. He had a mask, he had flippers, he had a 7-pound weight to bring him down in the water, but no oxygen tank. He made 3-minute dives holding his breath and brought these three men up to the surface so that their loved ones could have funerals for them quickly.
Yeah, there's more to his story. I mean, this is what he does as really a extraordinary act of mercy. That he does this for families in these situations. So it's a wonderful piece. I encourage our listeners to please read it at ncregister.com and in the latest edition of the Register. Tragedy at Rattlesnake Falls. Opus Dei mourns the drowning of 3 of its members. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, Shannon.
You're listening to Register Radio on EWTN Radio. Next, we talk with Jonah McKeown about the technology undergirding anti-pornography age restriction laws. Stay tuned to Register Radio here on EWTN Radio.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Shannon Mullen. The Supreme Court's recently concluded term featured a host of consequential decisions that are of high interest to our Catholic audience. Register staff writer Jonah McKeown joins us to talk about a Texas case that could have a big impact on efforts to keep porn away from kids. Welcome, Jonah. Tell us,
hey,
what
Shannon,
was this?
Great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks. Tell us, Jonah, what was this case about?
So this case, it's called Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton, and it concerns a 2023 law in Texas that essentially mandates that porn websites have to verify the ages of all users visiting the site. And Texas isn't unique in requiring this. In fact, about half of all U.S. states have passed these kinds of requirements, really only in the last couple of years. Louisiana was the first to do so in 2022. And basically, the challenge that was brought to this law was brought by the pornographic websites, and basically their argument was, this law burdens the free speech of these websites, basically making a First Amendment argument. And what the court did was basically dismantle that argument entirely. The court ruled that these websites do not have a First Amendment standing to, not verify all their users' ages. So it really was quite a significant victory.
Yeah, we'll get into now that it's passed constitutional muster, how do you enforce it? But just let's back up for a little bit, Jonah. The impetus for this law in the first place is this epidemic of pornography, which is being consumed by people of all ages, right? But what's driving it is just the ease of going to a website, clicking on something on your phone. It's so readily and rampantly accessible. And it's just become a huge problem for kids. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, obviously, as Catholics, we would hope that no one would be accessing pornography online, but obviously that's not the case. And what my research found is that, unfortunately, roughly 53% of 11-year-olds have their own smartphone nowadays. And among teenagers, it's now 95%. And, as we know, many Catholic parents try to limit their children's use of devices, maybe using filtering software, things like that. But unfortunately, the research has shown that this doesn't always work. And sadly, the average age of children being exposed to pornography is roughly 11 years old. And other statistics have shown that by the time they turn 18, almost every male child has been exposed to pornography in some way, and roughly half of female children as well. So it really is a serious problem.
Yeah, it's so. Let's turn our attention to the technology. So, it sounds good in principle. Make sure that people who are unfortunately accessing these sites are not children, are not under the age of 18. That sounds sensible, but it poses a technological challenge. What is it?
Right, it does. And just to kind of lay the groundwork here, most users have signed up for, say, a social media site that requires that you're over the age of 13. And what they've probably encountered in that scenario is what's known as an age gate. And basically, that is when a website pops up a box saying, all right, enter your date of birth. Prove to us that you're over the age of 13 or 18 or whatever. And there's absolutely no way to verify that. Anyone can put in any age that they want, even if it's not their real age. So that's the very lowest level of verification. And you might think that almost sounds silly, but most pornographic websites, that's all they require. At least the ones not in states with age verification laws. So technologically speaking, stepping up from there, there are other ways to verify users' ages. They can provide, a credit card number, or, the gold standard is obviously providing a government-issued ID. But a lot of privacy advocates and other people have raised pretty significant concerns about that because, especially if one is visiting an adult website, you don't want to hand over that kind of information. And this is kind of the crux of the argument that the pornographic websites made is that they want this kind of level of privacy. But the bottom line, Shannon, is this level of privacy is available, technologically speaking. I spoke with the executive director of a trade organization that represents a number of tech companies that this is what they do. They verify ages, and they do it by a mechanism called third-party verification, which basically means that there is an organization that is trusted and audited and proven to be trustworthy they do the verification of the age, and then they produce essentially a token or a certificate, an electronic in electronic form that can be provided to a website. And it doesn't have to be an adult website. It could be something else age restricted, like alcohol, for example, or renting a car. But these third parties are very secure, very trusted, and they can provide proof to the website that the user is over 18 without actually revealing any other information about them. And so, the bottom line is the people I've spoken to, the experts in, technology and policy that I've spoken to, have really very effectively dismantled this narrative from porn companies, saying that, well, we can't do this age verification because it's too complicated. It's too, there's privacy concerns. That is not true. So
Yeah.
That's really the bottom line that our listeners need to know.
Yeah, and your story makes the case, explains that it's not Texas that's insisting on a certain type of technology. It's basically turning to these companies and say, in essence, you figure it out. But what you're showing is that those technological means are available to them. So I guess now that this case has been resolved, first of all, it doesn't just affect Texas. Can you explain that, Jonah?
Right. So as I mentioned before, there's at least 23 other states that have passed similar age verification laws. Now, something that's important for people to know about this is that in the vast majority of states that have passed laws like this, porn websites have simply kind of thrown up their hands and said, well, we'll just pull out of this state. We will not offer our services in this state because we don't want to do this age verification, which is obviously a very telling thing for them to do. And so it's important that this law was upheld because for one thing, it like you said, it gives the law much deeper legal standing. But it also it will hopefully lead to a strengthening of these laws, to make sure that if the porn sites decide to try and pull out, because basically what they do when they say they're pulling out of a state, they kind of wink at their users and say, well, you should just find a workaround, use a VPN, a virtual private network, to try and make it seem as though you're in a state that doesn't have age verification. And several of the sources I talked to said that this is an opportunity for states to really strengthen their laws and make sure that things like using a VPN and that kind of thing are addressed in the law, to make sure there aren't just these workarounds to the age verification laws.
Okay, so what will happen next? I think we're already seeing in some states these porn companies basically picking up and leaving, right? And maybe that was the intent all along. It's certainly a good outcome.
Right. It is absolutely a good outcome, but as I mentioned, they have kind of mobilized their user base to try and find workarounds to this, and as I mentioned, this is something that will need to be addressed, because the whole intent of these laws, whether it's in Texas or otherwise, is obviously to protect our children from this great evil of pornography. And so hopefully, some of these companies, they will realize that age verification can in fact be done. And actually the gold standard for this right now is Louisiana. Louisiana actually offers a mobile ID. So your driver's license can be basically just a digital mobile ID and that can actually be used to anonymously prove your age to an adult site. So actually, Louisiana is kind of at the forefront of this, and it's great that children are being protected there.
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. It's an issue, and that we're going to keep close watch on. There's been so much bad news when it comes to the pornography epidemic. This was some welcome good news, and we hope it bears good fruit. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shannon.
Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks for joining us on Register Radio here on EWTN. Until next week, I'm Shannon Mullen. Please take care and God bless.